this meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order at 5:31 p.m. I'll have the coordinator call the roll.
Ms. Pearson?
Present.
Mr. Allens? Mr. Scrivano? Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Ms. Stanford? With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Would like to thank Connor, who's helping out in the back, to produce our board meeting on Channel 20. So thank you, Connor. Ask board members to remember to, and everyone else, to have their mask on properly over their mouth and nose. Speak into the microphone so we can hear you when it's your turn to speak. And board members, please hold your questions until the end. And you have a lovely notepad, I'm sure, now with you that you can write your questions down. So thank you. I would just ask now, are there any changes, corrections, or additions to the meeting minutes of January 5th, 2021? If there are no changes, we'll have consensus to approve those. Thank you. We have some recognitions tonight, so we're going to let internal, external stakeholders portion of our meeting will be moved to the beginning. So Mr. Siegel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very kindly. We're going to lead off with recognitions. I'm excited about this. There's been a lot of activity. Rockford School Board and RPS 205 administration like to recognize all students who qualify for a state-level competition and applaud their outstanding achievements, hard work, and dedication. Because of the ongoing pandemic, state competitions were suspended this school year. I'd still like to recognize the following students and their coaches, families, and friends for their achievements in the fall 2020 athletic season. IHSA Girls Tennis, Baylin Nevenhoven and Bong Pham from Auburn High School and Casey Alcott from Guilford High School qualified for the state singles tournament. In doubles, Auburn's Paris Thompson and Amy Park, and Madeline Harned and Alyssa Trapp, and Guilford's Sarah Dennis and Maggie Thomas qualified for the state doubles tournament. Auburn High School won its 3rd straight sectional championship title. And several of these student athletes have made repeat trips to the state tournament. They no doubt would have represented Rockford well. Congratulations. IHSA Girls Golf. Guilford High School's Kayla Salin shot a 79 at sectionals to tie for 6th place and a qualifying spot for the IHSA State Girls Golf Tournament. Rockford Co-op Players is only a sophomore, and we're excited for next season. IHSA Girls Swimming, Auburn High School's Ursula Koch finished 2nd in the 200 individual medley and 1st place in both the 500 freestyle and 100-yard breaststroke to qualify to compete in the state tournament. Ursula is only a sophomore, so we're very much looking forward to next season. Athletes at Eisenhower Middle School also found success this fall. In IESA Girls Golf, Eisenhower Middle School's Leah Hunter finished in 6th place at the sectional tournament with a score of 106, which would have qualified her to compete in the state golf tournament. Hope the 8th grader continues competing next season for the Rockford Co-op team. Eisenhower Middle School's boys cross-country team won the sectional meet, which would have qualified the team for the IESA state cross-country meet. The team includes Landon Bacta, Evan Osborne, Micah Stanley, Donovan Kowalski, Blake Durkin, Quentin Richter, Derek Ekstrom, Bodie Konings, Thatcher Townsend, and Andrew Bacta. Eisenhower Middle School girls cross-country team took 2nd in the sectional meet, so they also would have qualified for the IESA State Cross Country Meet. This team includes Brooke Lindsay, Kaya Durso, Riley Harmson, Chloe Boja, Samara Norton, Lilith Hill, Isabella Savanason Wynn, Chloe Teeters, Madeline Finkenhofer, and Olivia Fulbright. Congratulations to these outstanding student athletes, and congratulations to their coaches, families, and friends for supporting them during their seasons.
All right, they're not here, but let's stand up anyway.
Defog.
Need a hairdryer? Okay.
Maybe. Moving on to the internal stakeholders matters. As you know, we have been partnering with the National Equity Project for the last few years, and in this school year, we as a board have become a good deal more engaged with their work. Had a number of meetings kind of to gear us up for listening sessions with students, and we did end up having our first listening session on December 17th. This was mentioned at the last committee of the whole meeting, but I'm bringing it up again because this has been a really great starting point in these conversations with our students. It's a fairly small group. They made the time during their school day to come and share their experiences, their ideas, and they started off a little reserved in talking to us, but over the course of the meeting, were able to open up rather substantially and share, I think, some very important ideas for us to consider for ways that we can recognize areas where we might be falling short. And honestly, a lot of the ideas were fairly simple fixes. In that meeting, we then moved on to just last week. The National Equity Project had a meeting with all of our principals, and I was fortunate enough to get to sit in on that meeting and kind of share what my experience had been listening to the students. I think it's very important that we were able to have a couple of board members, because Member Stanford was with us in December. We could be there right at the start of these listening sessions. As they move into discussions with principals, and as we have more meetings, because we will have another student listening session on the 25th? The 11th, right. That'll be coming up on the 11th. On the 25th, we will be meeting with African American staff. Significance of being able to share this with principals is, I think it's important that the students understand that all levels of the organization are listening and hearing the same things. So at the board level and at the administrative level, they can get an understanding of what is happening in the classroom from the student's perspective. I really do believe that the student perspective is going to be a key that's going to unlock a lot of the things that we have not understood about how to reach them, how to provide an education that's going to be relevant and appealing to them, one that's going to serve them better than it has so far. So the process is slow. I think the progress has been very steady in preparing us for the listening sessions, having these listening sessions, having them fold over from one level to the next, and then to continue having the listening sessions as we go forward. I'm fairly excited about this, and I hope everybody else is too. And I would be happy to entertain any questions about a particular topic.
My only comment is, so you'll be providing updates to the board to what input you're getting from those listening sessions.
That is correct. At this point, the initial listening session was with a fairly limited number of students. And I guess conveying their stories, their personal stories, might be a bit identifying, and that isn't really our goal. Our goal is to address things at a system level and not at that individual level.
I would agree.
Yes, I will continue to be engaged in these meetings, and I will report as those meetings come up. Moving on to the really exciting stuff, lobbyists. We have had a couple of meetings with McGuire Woods, our lobbyists working for the district. Have been very illuminating. It reported that we had a meeting with Dave Vella that went very well, and he seems to have jumped right into education committees and getting himself very much up to speed in the education world. So I'm very excited about that. Today we had a meeting with Senator Dave Severson, which was certainly an interesting meeting, and very much appreciated the time that he took to speak. I think we had a very thoughtful and respectful conversation, and he definitely had some interesting insights for the schools. Did say that he is, much more of a healthcare and budget person than he is wrapped up in education. But nevertheless, he definitely had some keen insights for us. Speaking specifically about the budget, gave us some indications that revenues are very strong, which was a surprise to me, and I think it was a surprise to the other people who were in the meeting, which included Mr. Earl Dotson Jr. and Dr. Jarrett, as well as our representatives from McGuire Woods. The question was, where is the state's deficit coming from if revenues are very good? So trying to figure out exactly how this revenue is up, but we don't really know where the money is going, is certainly a question mark. We had a really robust conversation about funding for facilities plans, and we discussed strategies of being able to maybe get projects ready that we can then really lobby or advocate for maybe matching funding from the state for projects that we would have. And he seemed very, very receptive to that idea. And I think that could be helpful in generating revenue for the next facilities plan. That kind of moved into a discussion about facilities funding revenue coming from gaming. There had been a lot of problems getting that launched, not least of which COVID, but he had some ideas about some of our problems are in getting gaming revenue going. Regardless, we should expect that gaming funding for facilities is likely to still be a good ways off. It, of course, reinforce the importance of maintaining and even growing evidence-based funding. And he certainly seemed to be understanding of the importance of evidence-based funding, but had some ideas about things that he thought needed to be changed. The priority of disbursement of funds. He seemed very interested in trying to get Tier 1 schools like Rockford to get some priority over Chicago. I definitely had the sense that there was a lot of things that he would prefer would take precedence over things happening in Chicago. Rightfully so. He doesn't represent Chicago. He's representing our region, and we should be grateful that he is fighting for us. And was really for our lobbyists. Any questions or ideas or input you would like to give for the next lobbyist meeting, which we are hoping to set up next month? We are hoping to meet with either Maurice West or Steve Stottleman. We do want to keep engaged with our local representation. Okay. I am supposed to preview consent items, but there, as yet, is none.
Very good.
None.
Thank you. I'll move on to the performance and monitoring, which Mrs. McCulloch will lead that report.
All righty, thanks, Ken. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Ken?
Yes, we can. It's a little quiet, but maybe you could move a little closer to the microphone.
It's in my ear. I don't know how to do that. All right. Is this any better? Not really, huh? Okay, let me turn this off.
Yes, it is.
All right. Is this any better?
Yep.
All right. Okay, thank you for sharing that with me. All right, we have 3 policies that are up with some changes. Will be coming up for a vote on February 9th. The first one is food service, and what it is food or beverage provisions that are sold as part of the reimbursable meals just need to meet nutritional standards as specified by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and so that's the change. We have to meet their guidelines. The second one that is up is under general personnel, and it updates our policy on workplace harassment and how it's prohibited. Has a few changes. It updates the list of protected categories. It also expands the list of what won't be tolerated. It adds actions, words, and jokes won't be tolerated about any of the protected categories. It instructs individuals who've been aggrieved to what options they have to where to file a complaint, and it updates the contact information for our non-discrimination coordination manager, how's that for a mouthful, as well as our complaint managers, much like we did with previous policies. So Dr. Jared and Mr. Zediker's contact information is going to be embedded in that policy. The third policy we'll be updating is 7.30. This comes from the IHSA. They have recommended a change, and It's my understanding the districts around us have all embraced this for our student co-curriculars and athletic ability. And what it is expanding the opportunity to participate in spring sports specifically for students who in the previous semester were only passing 3 full credit classes. Our regular policy states they have to be passing 5 full credit classes in the semester before they are to participate. But because of COVID, the remote learning, the blended, all the pieces that are in there, the district, or well, I should say the state and is supported by administration to try to utilize these co-curriculars somewhat as more as an intervention than an incentive is how it's been described. But once the students, what has not changed is that once the students begin to participate, even if they hadn't been passing 3 in the previous semester, to participate during the sport, each week they will have to be passing 5 full credit classes and have no unexcused absences. So that hasn't changed. I do kind of wonder because we won't vote on this until the 9th. The students have gone back and they're going to start their competitions this week. So I asked the question, are they allowed to participate before we vote on this? And I was told no. Currently it stands, they have to be passing 5. So anybody who gets in under this, any student could already be practicing, they just can't be participating. And now they can't participate until we vote on it on the 9th, which means it's at the end of a week where they would have to be passing 5 classes. So aren't they in the same place they would have been based on when this is coming to board? But that's where we're at with it. So those 3 will come to us for a vote on February 9th. We have an update on our Tier 1, 2. We had some questions after the last meeting about the tiers, and because it dovetails in with the budget process, which Mr. Rollins will be bringing forward in a short while, we have a very, very short slide deck that I believe Ms. Brooke is going to put up on the screen for us. Thank you, Ms. Peterson. I know that you guys said I could drive this, but because I'm going to ask you to do so. So I'll just tell you when to change the slide. So what we're talking about tonight, the Plan, Do, Study, Act tiers, and if we switch the slide, the first one goes back and reminds you that Tier 1 is managed at departmental levels. The consent becomes from cabinet, and the board's involvement is merely when there is expenditures over $25,000. I know that board members were interested in what is in the Tier 1, so attached to your board docs is a complete list of all the items and which departments they're housed under. From that list, we dive down into Tier 2 categories, and that is the one where we bring it down to about 20, 15 to 20, but maxing out at 20. They take it off the inventory of tier, where we started with Tier 1, and we're going to see a little calendar in a minute to see when all this happens during the course of a year. Those high-level initiatives have a possibility of becoming Tier 3. In fact, the board determined what they wanted to have in Tier 3 based on those Tier 2s from last year. So again, you have attached to your board docs all the Tier 2s and where they live, and you're welcome to go back and take to further peruse those. And we on an annual basis are supposed to get high-level PDSAs on what's happening with each of those items. As I said, we dove down and chose 3 for Tier 3, the most important, and it was a decision made jointly by cabinet and the board. The 3 that we chose will have the most money involved, so there's a significant expenditure of money, but also a significant impact on the students. So we are looking at, because we're in the process of looking at Freshman Academy and Reading Horizons. The third one we chose was behavior intervention specialists, but that's been delayed because of the COVID and the remote learning, and the job that they are doing, our behavior intervention specialist, is something we want to see what's happening within the buildings. So it's still on the list. We'll move back into it, but at the moment we're focused on Freshman Academy and Reading Horizons, and we will continue to be focused on that. I was informed that because it takes about a year to put together the whole study of what we're looking at, to figure out what we want to continue, that it's not like we'll pick 3 different tier 3s every year, that we need to continue on and do a deeper dive. So we will continue to look at the academic return on investment for the Freshman Academy and the Reading Horizons, and my understanding, resume the one with behavior intervention specialists next year. So the final slide gives you a little bit of a picture of the timing and how, as I said earlier, it dovetails in the budget process. So you'll see that white bar on the bottom that divides the pinks, which is showing us that we are at the point right now where they are resetting all the tiers. They're looking at them again. But tiers after that, in February, tiers 2 and 3, we'll have progress reports that'll be brought to both the cabinet and the board. And then in, mine went away.
Are you still there?
I am. Am I not here?
We lost you visually and voice-wise. Now you're back.
Oh, okay, and you can see me as well. I can't see the screen. I'm going to have to go on a different screen here to get back in. But Brooke, I know you're there. Do you have a mic? Can you just finish with how the budget, the green bar across the top, where we're at in that process? And I'm going to boot up on a different one here.
Sure. Yep. The important thing to see on this is the purple is the annual reviews. That's the work at the department levels. The pinkish red, however it's showing up on your screen there, is the reporting to cabinet and board. And kind of you'll see this October-November window. In a typical year, we're a little bit behind this year, but that will lead you into what you'll see in the budget up here, starting in kind of the December-January time, where we'll work on that in our departments. And then those reports will start flowing to you through the committees. And like Jude mentioned, we'll have our resets here soon. Again, a bit late this year, but that is the plan, to hopefully do that in January annually. I think we might have lost Jude again, so I'll move to the next slide if she needs to come back.
I'm here, but go ahead and finish.
Okay, sorry, thank you. The next steps are just simply to bring the tier list to cabinet to finalize changes in the tiers if there's anything needed based on our rubric. And then February 26th board update, we'll have all of those tier changes acknowledged in the update written, and provide the high-level tier 1 report to the board for you guys to review if you would like.
All right, thank you so much. Is there anybody who has any questions about the process that we're going through? I think it's...
Go ahead, Mike. Mr. Connor.
Yeah, one question for Mrs. Yar. In the actual budget process, how do we identify the tier 1, 2, 3? Can you remind me?
I guess my mic's having a problem. when we take you through, we'll show all the contracts that are there. When people are asking for requests, when departments are asking requested funds, they are actually going through this process ahead of time to make sure that we're making investments in what is making a difference or what we, are perceiving to make a difference in with our data. So we are doing that ahead of it before we ask for funds.
Sure. I think the question, though, was more, how do you indicate it? Will it be color-coded? Will you have a numbering system?
I don't have that broken out. I just have the details of the contracts. I don't really have it broken out, so we can put that in.
I think even if it's a separate report, what I'd suggest is that, and I think this is something we discussed before, that because a lot of these might have either ancillary or contracts or what have you that might not be easy to follow for us. Mm-hmm. If, especially for Tier 3, of course, but I think even for 2 and 1, one of the things we've said pretty consistently is that you want to see from year to year how these things make a difference. And if we don't have it essentially earmarked in the budget somehow, some way, even if it's a separate report or a part of it, it's very hard to, at least for me, speaking for me, to see what relates to what.
Okay, we could try to, we can go through and flag that.
In the written update on the 26th, you'll be able to see the overview of, what the initial expense was, what the total expense was, what the goals were, what our action steps are for all Tier 1 and Tier 2. So you'll have the list that you have attached to board docs tonight, but you will also have a more extended report that will allow you to see kind of the all-in cost, the goals, and the proposed next steps. So as you go through the budget process, you'll have that resource in front of you, so you can go kind of as in-depth or not as you need to.
Cool. And will that be kept up to date throughout the year? So I'm glad you said that, because I was going to ask, if you look, for example, and I'll just pick on one item, under college and career readiness, it's got CNC IGA, and I can't remember if we have like just one contract with them and detail below or what have you, but I think
you'll have all that information that will flow across in the report. Cool. It'll be a hefty report, so it'll be just a kind of a resource only as you have those questions.
Yep. As long as we've got that and it's updated throughout, then that would be great.
It's essentially a full summary of everything that you've gotten throughout the year as they've come forward to, for your approval.
Okay. I think, let me just be clear on this, that summary is the important part for me, because, again, it's easy to get lost in the detail, and this really helps to track what we've got on these priorities. So, thank you.
Brooke, this is Ken. I have one suggestion, which you can either take or throw away. But for me, looking at the list of the Tier 1s and Tier 2s, some of them under the item they're self-explanatory. Many of them are not for me. So, like, I don't know what incubator is. I don't know what essential elements is, whatever. So, some of them, the alignment Rockford thing, I know what that is. I know what K-12 is, whatever. But some of them, I really don't know what they are. So in the listing, it would help me as a board member to have a very, I'm not into a lot of detail, but a very short column that says description, and says, okay, incubator is, this is what it is. So that I mean, if you ask the board members here today, how many of you know what incubator means? It does. Okay. One out of, okay. So, school camera replacement, we understand what that is. That's about security cameras in our buildings or whatever. But anyway, I don't want a paragraph. I'm talking about a few words of description of the item would be helpful to me. So hopefully that wouldn't be too hard to do.
So to just explain to kind of what you'll expect in the February 26th report is some more of that detail.
Okay.
And the origin of this list actually is kind of more, it serves the purpose of more of an internal checklist for our departments to know what work they need to do. But I see your point 100%, and I don't know that it would be too difficult to add that if that's the will of the group as well. So.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mrs. Peterson. That makes sense. I think the other question I've got on this one is, I know that there's methods where, if you will, this bubbles up, and I'm looking at Tier 1 because that's the most extensive list. Is there a regular scheduled review with the principals or, other parts to walk through some of these to see how either their school relates to this or their what this means for them? So again, I'm going to pick on Cianci because that has a lot to do with vocational training and is our cooperation with the regional group, which is Cianci. So I'd just be curious about how much review these kinds of things are done with the various principals. And my one comment for the public is, I recently, over the last year, went back to the high schools and saw what the schools are doing with vocational, and it's fabulous, with leaps and bounds. So I think we should all be very proud of it. So that's really one of the reasons why I'm asking, is that to make sure that the principals see the direct link back to these tiers, because they'll probably get questions from either parents or staff, almost guaranteed, when they hear some of these things. And I'll pick on Incubator, because I think that's a really good example of something that has real value, and especially so much has been made of entrepreneurship and some higher education that will go unnamed has made a big deal of having some of these things when Rockford Public Schools already has it. So I think, again, that's why I'm asking about, to make sure that principals and the people who are on the front lines really understand their relationship and the importance of these.
Jared?
That's an excellent point, Mr. Connor. And there are two mechanisms for Tier 1 review. One is we have a menu of options that principals can order from that is many Tier 1 items are covered in, that is annually reviewed and expanded or retracted depending on the success of those items for site-based budgeting. But the other component is these are really closely monitored as part of the budgeting process. So when Mrs. Yar and the team roll out the budget process, each group is expected to really closely review all of their Tier 1 items, because Tier 1 really means we are asking a manager or a department to manage and review the success of this. When it gets to Tier 2 now, we're talking about things that are going to get additional board and cabinet scrutiny. Tier 1, we're really counting on the person running the department and their team to do that review. So this allows us to put our limited time and focus on the Tier 2 and ultimately on the Tier 3 options. So I think that the menu review is one area we engage the principals, and then all of the departments that are managing these respective Tier 1 projects really have to do the heavy lifting to make sure they're getting that return on investment.
Okay, is that everybody's questions about this?
I have another question about the policies. I didn't want to do that until we were, if anybody had any other questions for Brooke or Jude.
About what, Ken?
One of the, this is for Mr. Zedeker actually. In the policy on harassment, it talks about annual training is provided for sexual harassment for, can you just tell me in a couple sentences, what, is that an online program? Is that,
Yeah,
I wasn't sure how,
as part
the
of
process.
Yep, as part of our yearly mandated trainings, harassment is included in those yearly mandated trainings, which are offered via computer in that mode.
Someone monitors that the right people are doing all that, and
Yep.
if they don't, they can't keep working.
That's right, and you'll see on the contracts for talent development, Public School Works, that's a vendor we utilize to keep track of who has completed their mandated trainings and who have not.
I want to put a plug in for that. That's been really good. I had a chance to do some of that work on my lunch hour today, and I actually took the sexual harassment training today. And yes,
He's
yes.
good. Okay,
Yeah,
good.
but it really is an efficient way. There are video passages and other written materials that you can review. You take a pre-test in some cases, or in some cases you just review the materials and take the test. It's a really efficient way with thousands of employees to monitor that people are completing those. Now, obviously we can't change people's hearts and their behavior, but we can at least make sure they get the mandated training and have the information in their brains. So that's really important, and that's been much more efficient than I think in the past. We kind of had to put things in people's files if they completed them or not, and frankly I think there were some challenges with keeping up with the detail, because the state is very good at adding mandates for training. Sure. We have such trainings as bloodborne pathogens, all kinds of different things that we have to be proficient in. So kudos to the team on that one.
I was good. Can you come to the microphone, Lori? Okay. Okay, all right.
It's one category.
Yes,
Okay.
that's just the clarification. We don't
Okay.
want to teach people how to sexually harass.
Right, okay. Right, there you go. Understood.
Thank you, Mrs. Hoadley.
Okay. All right, Mrs.
Okay.
McCulloch, anything else for your committee?
Yep. So if you go to preview of consent items, Laura and I came to the conclusion that the board asked last time how they can look at the consent agenda items without having to go into the main governing board and meetings and drafts and the date. And so what she's done is under preview of consent items, under administrative content, there's a link, a link that'll take you directly to that draft agenda. And it's only available once you authenticate yourself on the server. So I'm going to go to those consent agenda items right now. We actually have quite a few. We can have a little bit of a conversation. I don't know how much time Mr. Rollins needs, and I don't want to bump into yours, but there's information that I'm sure you're going to want to take a look at outside this meeting before we vote, because all these agenda items, consent agenda, will be back with us on February 9th. So number 9I is it's really an addendum. You guys have seen the ULLC before come through. That's the Urban Learning and Leadership Center. As well, you've seen the DMG. And what this is an addendum for some additional work with those two groups for schools. ULLC to work with Conklin, Flynn, and Riverdale to improve their achievement. And that's $112,500 for all three schools. DMG would be working with RESA primarily on chronic absenteeism. Both have a lot of professional development. And to use the funds to work on this as accountability, to use those funds, you have to go with organizations that have been vetted and approved by the state, and both of these have. The amount for the DMG for RESA is $55,000. I'll just go through the other addendum, which is 9J, and that is Learning A to Z. It's only for $633. But it's for an app. They're already using it for elementary reading across the district. The problem is we don't have enough licenses. So this is going to buy us additional licenses specifically for the teachers who are teaching at Page Park remotely, and this is for elementary students for reading. We actually have one other addendum, and that's the News to You. That would be the last on the list, and that is for 5 additional licenses. Also, because of the remote learning, we didn't have enough licenses when we bought, and so those 5, we already bought 55. This will be 5 more, and that's $3,758, and that is for use by special ed teachers with plus classrooms. And we have some teachers who are teaching remotely for the special ed students who typically would not be teaching with a remote plus classroom. And so we hadn't planned on those numbers when we bought those licenses. The big ticket item on our list is the ombudsman contract is up for renewal. There's a 3-year renewal listed on here. There is a link on this to their annual I'm pulling it up right now, to their annual report, which they actually give to us for the previous year in the fall. So the timing's not quite right, but it is there for your interest. I pulled out a few facts. They had 320 students last year come through. The breakdown, 60% of those were male, 53% were African American, 55% were 9th graders, and we had actually 40% of the students who entered, the largest group entered at age 16. So I thought it was an interesting sentence that they said they're there to serve the overage, undercredit, or academically behind student. 45 of the 320 had IEPs. Of the 320 at the end of the year, 212 returned this year, because this is all for 2020. 37 went back to their home school. 23 actually graduated. Of the classes, because of COVID and them having to stop and go fully remote in March, there were quite a bit that were incomplete. Of the 1,642 credits, 715 were completed by 9th graders, and it said 728 were incomplete because of the closure and were going to be finished this year, and we don't have an update on that. One of their real outstanding numbers is their attendance. The last 2 years, they've had a 70% attendance rate with the students. I think that 3 years ago it was 87%, so I don't know what happened that it went down, but it's still much higher than those students were achieving in their home schools, which was 54% was the number we were given. The referrals, none of the referrals were for attendance, interestingly enough, last year. 46% were for behavior and 54% were for academics. And one of the positives is that they allow students to not only catch up, but get ahead with credits earned, because even though they're slotted for a 3-hour time at school, they can come in and do additional work to get even farther ahead. The contract, we pay for a number of slots for students. So it's like $4,700 a slot, and we buy 250, and there's also a minimum number. This year, we're only using, I think, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Vosberg, Dr. Vosberg, but 106, and of that, only 3 are remote. The rest, only 3 are in person. The rest, the students are all remote. So we still have to pay for the slots or the minimum number, even if we don't have the students there, because of the resources that they are committed to with their building, with their staff. And so that will be the same coming up in the next 3 years. You can look at the numbers, but it averages about $1.2 million a year for the next 3 years. The last 2 pieces that we'll be voting on under the consent agenda have to do with incentives that we've put out there to try to increase recruitment of teachers and increase recruitment of some of our more diverse teaching candidates. 9L is the incentive. It's $200,000 incentive for relocation, and that's the one where we can offer $3,000 for housing, $3,000 based on hard to fill positions, which are specifically listed as bilingual, secondary math and science, special education, speech language pathologists, social workers, and procedural coaches. We're expecting 60 vacancies this next year, and Over the last 2 years, I know Matt had given that we had provided 66 incentives, and this would be Matt Zediger, but you just gave me an update, so let me go ahead and pull this up and share this with my fellow board members. I asked for a breakdown in terms of the recruitment incentives, who they were going to, and of the incentives in the last 2 years, by content area, we've had 7 for math, 10 for bilingual, 9 for science, 10 for special ed, and that was all in the year 1920. And then this year for 2021, we have recruited and offered incentives to 4 teachers in math, 2 in bilingual, 10 in science, 8 in special ed, 2 procedural coaches, 1 social worker, and 1 speech language pathologist. 10 of those went to diverse candidates. I asked how many incentives a teacher can get, and typically just 1, although the board can authorize additional if and have when asked. And 5 out of the 67 have left the district, and so they are in the process of paying the incentives back to the district. I'll cover this last area, and then you guys can fire your questions. The last one is the 9M, and that is the incentives for aspiring teachers, and that's specifically for housing. And last year we had 5 teachers start the process, but only 4 ended up finalizing the housing. 1 of those was diverse. The cost for the 4 was $53,859. They all get the same amount. They each get $1122.08 monthly. I was told that this is grossed up amounts so that the taxes are covered. And the district actually works with landlords for potential sites, although the aspiring teachers ultimately choose where they live. And we actually send the payments directly to the landlords, not to the aspiring teachers. So the request is that we put this back in play for next year for 10 aspiring teachers. And the requirement is that they will work for the district for 2 years once they get their teaching degree. And the cost to the district would be $156,517 if we had 10 teachers take advantage of that. So those are all the items on your consent agenda, and also the ones that are new. Are there any questions? I think we've already covered the pieces from that are new. Is there any conversation about any of the consent agenda items?
Back on ILC, so we're paying a flat fee that gives us 250 slots. We're only using 106 of those slots this year. And I understand that's probably pandemic related, but I had heard in previous years that we weren't using all of our slots either. What's our average? Can you give me like a 4 or 5 year average?
Well, you saw last year we served 330 students there, so it's a rolling attendance. I've never heard of it being this low. It is pandemic related, but
what's our average census over there?
I don't have that number. Usually it's over 200. So there, as you see, there is a 70% attendance rate. So there are times where we monitor student attendance, and then that could create an opening for other students to take the spot. We do also use ILC for students that we put on EIAs, and EIAs are down tremendously this year, so that's an issue. But we do also have a high number of students that are credit deficient right now, more than we've ever had. And so I'll be following up with the principals to make sure that we're getting full utilization if we have a demand for it. I think there's been a little bit of a gap. Mrs. Hyde Carter is the manager of this contract and retired early January, so there might be a little bit of gap in communication about seat availability. Typically when I meet with the principals, they are requesting additional seats that we can't provide. So there is a demand, and we just need to follow up on the enrollment process.
Right, well, if you could just double check on that, because I guess my concern is that we're locking ourselves in here to another 3 years, paying a flat fee that gives us 250 slots.
Yeah, I share that concern.
If don't have a historical record of using 250 slots, I wonder if we shouldn't restructure this in some way to give us more flexibility.
We are usually at capacity from what I've been told by Angela and some of the principals. The challenge is the mobility, and so you're never at 250 on a given day, but there's always students in the enrollment process. But I'll follow up on that.
Other questions for Mrs. McCullough? Thank you, Jude.
Okay, well, you'll have opportunities to review and ask questions when they are brought to the board on February 9th. That ends my, thank you.
All right, Mr. Rollins will now lead the beginning and development portion of our meeting.
Tonight we start the board involvement of the development of the budget for the next fiscal year. I guess before we start on this, though, so we not that long ago approved a budget for this fiscal year with a $9 million deficit. I wonder if Ms. Yar could just give us, and the administration had said they were going to work on trying to get that number down, and just give us a little touchstone as far as where we're at right now with the budget.
Here we go. Okay. Yes, this is part of the presentation tonight. What I did and what Mrs. Sather and I worked on was to provide the board a picture of how we close that gap. We did not want to use our fund balance and operating funds, of course. We wanted to try to make some targeted cuts. So we've done that, and then we rolled that forward into fiscal year 22 because we were expecting, I know Mr. Siegel said we are expecting revenues to be strong, but we're taking a conservative approach on that. And then, you know, we did change the board policy to allow us to extend the budget approval process until September last year. So we will actually know revenue before we approve the budget in September for fiscal year 22, which will be a good process, and then we'll make adjustments from there. But we are showing fiscal year 22, as Mrs. Sather goes through, a gap, a shortfall there right now. We don't expect that to stay, but we do have a list of items that we went through, and we did list them out for the board, and we can talk through those. But we did change an allocation from the insurance fund, which Mr. Zedeker will be covering tonight. And then we also found some other targeted, like travel, PD, those types of things that we're not able to do. Some things came in, it's not what we want to have happen, but some things have saved us money because we're operating as, you know, with less students in our buildings, of course. We have less, we're using internal staff for our subs. We don't want to do that, but that's where we're at right now. And that does save dollars. So that was a little hard to project when we actually passed this budget, what the school year was even going to look like. So that's the highlights of what we're going to cover tonight. So we should be able to answer most of the questions through that.
Right. Well, with that then, tonight's overview of the fiscal year 2020 budget development priorities and assumptions will be presented by Ms. Michelle Sather, Executive Director of Budget. Ms. Sather, if you would just, and I'll just remind everyone to hold your questions until the end, and that's one of the reasons why hopefully you all have these books, and a pen, hopefully. So if you've got questions, write them down so that you don't forget them. That's part of the problem with having an electronic presentation is you can't just questions on the right page. So save your questions at the end, but write your questions down. Thanks.
Yeah, and I guess just to, as Mrs. Sather before she starts, just for a new board member, we start the budgeting process in October, so we have a budget calendar. We start in cabinet with our budget assumptions. We brought that forward to the committee with our multi-year spending plan. We've updated those. We have budget workshops in December with our department heads and our principals. It's a big collaboration with HR, schools team. Everyone really comes together to really support the principals and to support the departments as we go through the budget process. So what you're seeing is individual budget requests that will roll up into the budget at the end of our time preparing it.
Evening. Thank you. So yes, as we were discussing, I will be bringing forward our initial FY22 budget assumptions to the board and give, as Ms. Yar alluded to, towards the end of the presentation is kind of that fiscal year 21 projected budget where we can see how we've saved some dollars this fiscal year. Looking at the district budget, we are projecting a budget shortfall currently of a little over $3 million at this initial look with these assumptions built in. We did make some targeted reductions in 21 that have rolled to fiscal year 22 to reduce the starting point for our district budget for FY22. We are asking departments, or have asked departments through this process, to really assess their needs and only budget, what is needed, and look at academic ROI to really identify possible additional cost savings to fill the FY22 budget gap. Now, for Fund 80, we are going to be budgeting only the contracts just to kind of ease the reporting requirement of our tort fund. So we will see all of our salaries move to operating funds in the fiscal year 22 budget assumptions. We do have some CARES Act funding coming through, which will assist with some of facilities needs, but this is expenditure based. So basically whatever we do spend, we will see an offset in revenue on our financials throughout the year. Looking at the student-based budget, so what the principals or what the schools were able to budget and use for dollars for next year, we left those held harmless. So student-based budgeting dollars will be the same dollar amounts that they received in FY21 for principals to budget with. That's exactly what the state did for us for our evidence-based funding dollars. So we held schools harmless and gave them the same amount of money, with the exception of those boundary change schools. So we did make a few adjustments for those schools that had some boundary changes. Looking at budget assumptions, sorry, I feel like this is going in and out. Some revenue assumptions for FY22, evidence-based funding held flat at FY21 levels at $156 million. Our tax levy, we have 2020 tax levy that was approved. That's included new property, and we have also assumed new property for our 2021 tax levy, and we'll see a graph on that in a second here. And for our CPPRT revenue, we do anticipate a small decrease at the time, but as we get closer to approving this budget, we will have hopefully some better assumptions for our CPPRT revenue. Here's a chart for evidence-based funding revenue staying flat for fiscal year 22 at $156 million. A chart or a look for our CPPRT revenue, we could see FY22's assumption at this point is a little under $19 million. Here's a look at our property tax levy. So 2020 property tax levy, we passed that at $155.9 million. And with our 2021 levy, again, it's all estimated information at this point, but we are assuming including new property as we did for 2020's levy. Talking a little bit about our expenditure assumptions, salaries, we have incorporated any ratified union negotiated contracts increases in our budget assumptions, and those that are going to be under negotiations or not under a contract, we've assumed a 2% increase. Employee benefits, all of benefits we assumed flat except for our IMRF benefit, pension rate at an 8% blended rate. And for supplies and purchase services, again, budgeting flat, but hopefully being able to identify some cost savings as departments and departments go through their budgeting process. Looking at our multi-year here, oh, this is really small. So as Ms. Yars had mentioned, we have a fiscal year 21 budget deficit of $9.3 million. And with some work through the district and some anticipated savings. We are projecting now to basically have filled that gap and have a projected surplus at this point for fiscal year 21. With all the assumptions that we just spoke through, we are projecting FY22's deficit to be a little over $3 million. Hopefully through the work of all the departments, and we're able to close that gap as well. We'll continue to give updates. We will bring forward like a tentative budget in April, which will hopefully have some better assumptions built in or some changes, and we can talk through those at that point. And then with our budget not being passed until September, we'll definitely have time to any assumptions.
There's one more slide that shows the reductions that we made in the update to our projections. So this is a slide I was alluding to with an allocation change for health insurance expenses, and then transportation. So you can see the list of vacancies I spoke to as well. Those are the things that have allowed us to really align that deficit, that budget deficit that we had in FY21.
I'll start. So I just want to clarify, that first slide was a little confusing to me. I thought you were saying you're projecting a $3.1 million shortfall this year, but it looks like you've turned that $9 million shortfall into a surplus this year. Now you're projecting a $3.1 million shortfall next year. Is that what's going on here?
Yes.
So on the revenue assumptions, now we're sort of in unexplored territory here, let's put it that way. When do you think, what's the timeline for getting better information on some of these assumptions? Both the evidence-based funding, at what point do we think we'll get a better understanding from the state as far as what they plan to do for CPPRT?
I do, CPPRT, we typically get our next year's allocation or estimate like mid to late July, early August. So we will have that a better, idea come of July or August for CPPRT.
Yeah, evidence-based funding last year, we received that information in May. So in May, we will get the information, and then we'll update our projections and our assumptions.
Okay. Because this all sort of ties into then what we decide to do with the real estate tax levy.
That's correct.
So, and we have to decide that in next November, this November, is that correct?
Yeah, this November. So we'll know where our revenue lands, well before that. But yes, I really wanted to bring those conversations together as we go through this budget process, and bringing the board through the process of what we have to go through to try to balance the budget and updating our assumptions. And of course, this year it's very fluid with the evidence-based funding, the state funding, the CARES Act money that's coming through, additional federal dollars that we'll probably see as well. So it's very fluid right now.
What Senator Stevenson told you, Mr. Siegel, is consistent with what I've read, that state income is actually across the country is much stronger than probably expected. One of the reasons for that is this huge infusion of federal cash throughout the economy. A lot of that is taxable, and so the states are actually getting more revenue than you might expect in what would otherwise be a recession. Yes, I'm not willing to draw any conclusions on any of this now, but I just wonder if some of the assumptions that we're making on both EBB and on CPPRT may be a little on the negative side.
After the meeting with the senator today, I'm a little more optimistic on evidence-based funding than I was, but I'm still concerned because of some of the cost increases in other areas that the state has yet to fully deal with. But I'll certainly turn it over to Mrs. Yar or Mrs. Sather to talk about CPPRT. I think they would be better equipped to talk about the impact there.
Yeah, CPPRT last year, so last year our last payment was shorted $1 million. So our last payment we received in May, and that was short of $1 million. So what the state is doing, they're looking at their expenditures as well. So there's a lot that goes into that, and they decide what the allocation is going to be. So even if the revenue is strong there, we could still see something different. I mean, I was surprised, and I think, my peers around this area were also surprised that most of us got a $1 million cut at the end. So their estimates weren't correct when they gave them to us, and then at the end of the year, they're truing their expenses up and their allocation up, and then we were decreased when the pandemic had just hit in March. So it was not pandemic related, but we still could see a shortfall. So, in my opinion, it's better to be conservative at the front end. I mean, these are just very preliminary looks. This is in the beginning of our budget process, so we could always, we're going to look at this as we go through.
Were there any other questions about Mr. Siegel?
Looking at the CPPRT slide that's up, I'm struck by the rather substantial difference between the fiscal year 22 value and the fiscal 23, 24, and 25. Seems like a big jump.
So I looked at that. I mean, I'm expecting a V-shaped recovery. And then we have, for fiscal year 22, 21, those are good numbers. That's our actual, what we received was $19 million, and we were in the pandemic for a few months. So, we figured there would be a decrease of $1 million for 22 to be conservative, and then 23, things get back to more of a normal, back to 20, basically back to the 20 levels.
You said that 20 was a good number. That's what we really got.
In fiscal year 21, that
20.
about $20 million, that is the actual amount that we received. That we were shorted $1 million there. It should have been $1 million more.
The fiscal year 20, which was 24,142,000, that was we got for fiscal year 20?
Yes. So these are the actual numbers that.
So 23, 24, and 25 should be more based on 20 than 21 and 22.
Yeah, those are the pandemic years that were hit. I mean, 21, we shouldn't really have seen that much of a decrease, but that is what happened with CPPRT.
As far as assuming that because we managed to get this year to go into a surplus, we didn't have to tap into our reserves
we are not projecting that we have to tap into reserves, no.
And with a projected $3 million deficit for next year, 3.1, is that something that we should be considering?
I don't think at this time. I think we'll be able to balance it through revenue assumptions coming in higher than where we are right now. And with what departments are requesting, we are already seeing some savings through that as well. So I'm not that concerned that we won't have a deficit budget going forward. But right now, that's where we're sitting. So the board wanted to be involved with how do you balance your budget? How do we go through the budget? So this is bringing you into the process, not bringing up, balanced budget at this time as we're working through that.
I guess I would ask if there's ever discussion when departments are bringing forward cuts and saying we would really prefer not to do these sort of cuts. Is there a way that we could do this and tap into reserves? And I can't think of anything in particular off the top of my head that would mind.
There's probably some investments that we are pausing right now, but at the end, what we had normally done in the past years, and which we can do again when we get some other revenue, is making some investments, our Shark Tank style investments at that time. So as our revenue assumptions come in, there's some things we want to do, and those are the things that we'll be looking at with those enhanced assumptions.
Thank you.
Yes, two things. One, just want to remind the board we actually have a policy on the use of reserves that the board adopted about 10 years ago. So the use of reserves should comply with that policy. And I just want to sort of every couple of years, I think it's worth reminding people what CPPRT really is, because it's an odd term. So it's called Corporate Personal Property Replacement Tax, and until the 1960s, Illinois had a corporate personal property tax. Corporations paid tax on their personal property, and that was used to fund education. And the Constitution, which I think was adopted in 1970, it abolished the personal property tax, but directed the legislature to find an alternative. So what the alternative was, this is now actually corporate income tax, is generated by corporations, like for instance within our school district. But the problem is there's no formula for this. So, and what has happened to us in the past, and I don't know if it's happening again or not, is the state can just decide arbitrarily how much to pass on to us and how much to keep.
Right.
So, you know, when they did this $1 million adjustment, I don't know if that's because they actually received less revenue
Right.
or they just decided to keep more of it.
Right. I mean, usually they'll have their expenditures have gone up and they're allocating less, so.
Any other questions?
Something about that. The golden rule really means whoever has the gold makes all the rules.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So I
Ken, this
just a comment that in general that I want to make. You know, slide that shows, you know, the next 4 budget years in deficit numbers. That one right there in the red. That does not mean, I just want to be clear, that does not mean these are budgets that we're expecting to actually approve. Because we know that some things are going to change. Our revenue might go up in some areas and our expenses might have to go down in some areas or whatever. And we don't typically pass deficit budgets.
Last year was, I mean, I don't know how many, I looked before, but we did not pass a deficit budget. But during a pandemic, I mean, we were in a spot where, you know, things changed, literally our assumptions changed overnight by $20 million, literally. So, you know, to be short $9.3 million when our revenues went down overnight and $20 million is, I mean, it was a lot of work, and the board asked us to go back and try to find some savings, which we've done, so we did not want to go into fund balance. So I'm pleased to see that we have accomplished that.
Kudos to the team. All of our teams have really put a lot of great effort into this, and certainly our budget and finance team deserves a great deal of credit, so thank you. I would also add that Mr. Scrivano pointed out these future budgets. Another thing that's very different, and the reason you do see some red there, is we are fully baking in some multi-year budgeting assumptions for investments in things like facilities and technology and things. So, you know, a big part of this is we are being, we are laying out over multiple years what is needed to truly fund, for example, our deferred maintenance on facilities, which we spent almost an entire board meeting reviewing, and that's baked in there. So these numbers are at this point many years out, but do reflect some assumptions that are, you know, we're going to have to figure out how to prioritize moving forward. And so I appreciate that the team is laying that out there. But to Mr. Scrivano's point, under no circumstances do I think we'll get into the habit of passing deficit budgets, but this is a sense of what we do need to target for, that we sort of need to hit through a series of cuts and other things in order to make those multi-year budgets a reality.
And, you know, curriculum's baked into that. It's not just facilities, it's curriculum, it's, you know, technology. It's, you know, several categories that we brought forward for the multi-year spending plan, but it's, I mean, a great deal is facilities as well.
You know, as everybody understands, the challenge, the bulk of our expenses are in personnel.
Right.
I mean, that's our staff, that's our
Right.
salaries, and not too many of our contracts go down. They usually go up. Okay. You know, on an annual basis. So you know, the reality is if we don't see revenue increases or we don't control expenses other than salaries, it's real hard to balance, you know, a budget.
That's correct.
Connor, you have...
Ken, this is Jude.
I'm going to let Mr. Connor go and then Mrs. McCullough.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to make sure I understand on slide 14. So this is an update for this year, and Mr. Rowland said something at the beginning where we were like 9.1 million behind, and this says we're 10.3 to the good. Is this correct? That
Yeah.
so, because I want to make sure, because there were multiple conversations. So we are going to end the year, according to this projection, really with a overage of 10.3 is...
No, 9.3 minus the 10 is the 1.6 26 that you're seeing on slide 13. If you go into original FY21, that's our original budget that we passed at 9.3. And then you go to projected FY21. You have to kind of look at it on your screen because it's too small up there.
I can see it.
And that's $1 million. We have it highlighted in kind of a beige, yellow color.
So, okay, well, I
there's
wondered,
that
because I
$10
looked at
million
that, but
swing.
then, so what's the purpose of 14? I'm sorry. I'm really, if it shows 1 million there and here, it looks like 10. I'm not sure I understand the,
We had a budget of -9, and so
Right.
if we've got a budget variance of 10, we end up being $1 million over.
okay, so that was what,
It's
all
the
right.
budget variance. She's showing you
The net
where the
change.
budget variance is coming from.
Right, but I guess I was looking, sorry to do this, but I was looking for the 9 and how that fit in here, and I know me, I'm not a financial guy, but, if this is a net number that reflects that 1 million, I was trying to understand how that 10 related to that. So I totally get that, but I'm just, for those of us, to have it all together. I mean, it's hard enough to understand that, what the negatives and positives mean in relation to this. But yeah, if you could, because I was trying to go back to that 1 million, because it looks like this is 10. Sorry, I mean,
Yes, so
just on the surface.
it's just the net change in the 21 budget. Basically, the deficit of 9 million, we've added, we're able to project a $10 million savings, so that would bring us to a surplus on the next
Right.
page.
I'm just,
Yeah, it's just the way it's presented.
Right, it's the way it's put, because when you go back and forth, it was just the reconciliation. This slide is no problem. If you had said current 9 and then all the rest, I think I would have got it right away. But the fact that the 10 was sitting out there it's just a presentation thing.
This is McCullough.
All right, so this $1 million surplus is not factored at all into the projection for the 2022 budget. Would that be correct? That if indeed something came up and we were to spend part of that $1 million toward the end of the year, that would be just less that we were putting into reserves, but it would not reduce that deficit that you're showing of the $3 million in 22?
That's correct. Yeah, so if we had some priorities that we wanted to spend this new projected surplus for fiscal year 21, we would do that work, but nothing that wouldn't affect our 22 projected deficit at this point. Roll.
All right. And that percent, that 1 million, if we put that into, it's probably here somewhere and I'm not, if we put that into reserves, what percentage will we be at in reserves
It's down
for this year?
That's down at the bottom of that slide. I think it says 47%. Really see that?
4707.
I'm looking, can you, do you have a little cursor or something that you could show us? Thank you. I need that help. Oh, okay, I see why I had expanded it. So the 4707%, we have the year-end balance is going to be 177 million. Right?
Yes, that's our projection.
In reserves. Okay.
That's our projection.
Right, and that would be including that additional million. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for that information.
I guess just to follow up on Jude's point, we've done this in the past where if we think we're going to end with a surplus in this year and we're looking at struggling to beat the budget next year, is there anything that we can pull forward and buy this year?
We're working on that right now. So working with the team, actually we just talked about this in cabinet, today's Tuesday only. So it was yesterday that we were bringing that forward. So I'm revisiting the new requests for last year that we held. So we started there as a cabinet to look at those to see what could come forward and what we could, get done this year. So we are working on that right now.
Well, and Mr. Corrales, it's not just spending forward for next year, we also have to spend down all our, where are we at with our Title I and some of the others? Are we be given a pass if we don't spend it all? Do we have longer? Wasn't there some deadline change so that we didn't lose if we didn't spend it in a more timely fashion because of the type of education that we're having to provide this year?
Title, I mean, we typically we struggle to spend the title. Mrs. Detman has stepped out, or no, there she is. I'm going to have her weigh in on this too, but we do get carryover for title. We are able to carry that over. If we carry it over, it's usually a carryover from year to year. That's what we've experienced the last few years.
It's also the way that we're supporting extended day and extended learning throughout the summer. The grant year goes all the way through August 31st. It was Ms. McCulloch who asked the question. I was looking for the person to whom I should be addressing my response. So Ms. McCulloch, this is for you. And so we're working with community partners now to really ramp up that partnership and align those resources. So yes, but the grant dollars always close on August 31st.
Okay, thank you.
There are no other questions on that. We'll move on to the next phase. As you recall, and for the newer board members, what we do is we have each department come to us and give us a budget presentation for their department. And we are going to start off with Mr. Zedeker, Chief Human Resources Officer. And after Mr. Zedeker, we'll have Mr. Dotson, Chief Communications Community Engagement Officer. So let's start with Mr. Zedeker for the Human Resources Fiscal Year 22 preliminary budget.
Good evening. I'm here to present the preliminary FY22 budget for all of the human resources departments. Within HR, we focus on Goal 4, quality staff. Within our HR department, we have core HR, we have allocations compliance, recruitment and diversity recruitment, benefits, talent development, and then process improvement. Just some highlights and areas of focus for each one of the areas, or for several of the areas. For our recruitment, we are continuing to look at university partnerships for recruitment projects, whether that's aspiring teachers or some of our diversity recruitment efforts. We attend education job fairs and continue to focus on different ways for minority teacher recruitment. We just discussed a little bit about the housing incentive that was approved last year, and continuing with our hard to fill position and hired incentives from a recruitment perspective. Talent acquisition, again, working on postings and placements for mainly our teaching positions, but all positions in the district. And our focus is still to make sure that we are conducting job offers within 48 hours of receiving a rec for hire from a building administrator. We want to ensure that we're connecting with our potential employees so that we don't let time go to potentially lose those employees. We are also conducting new hire appointments. As much like any other department over the last year, we have had to adjust how we conduct our new hire appointments. You'll notice that we have stations out in the hallway, and the team has done a great job of meeting the demand and continuing to conduct those during the pandemic. Talent development, they have quite a bit that they're focusing on. The first one was onboarding, and we had just created a new in-person onboarding structure for our new employees, and the team has worked together to create a virtual one. So you will see our team meeting with new employees on Zoom and going over board policy, values, and any pertinent new information that employees need. They also continue to focus on career development as we continue to create professional development pathways for our educators, and leveraging university partnerships for higher ed. And then we continue to have peer assistance and review our process. And then finally, process improvement. This last year, we had to have a modified registration process for families. Typically in the springtime, our elementary buildings would connect with families for a spring registration, and then our secondary families would attend a 2-day kind of major event at the middle school and high schools to register. With the pandemic, we had to revamp what registration looked like. We centralized the entire process, and the process improvement team headed that up, not only with the design of it, but also the implementation. Also are currently working with Earl Dotson Jr. and the Welcome Center and other departments on centralization of enrollment, registration, and student records. What we're finding is we have some efficiencies to gain, also some customer service, and so they are heading up that centralized process that we have communicated with the board on, and we're on the early stages and would continue to educate the board and communicate the board as we move through. Then the last thing that they have focused on in that department is continue with data integrity. That started the last couple of years where we found that the inputs that we're putting into our system weren't accurate. And so we've gone through audits both with student files that are paper copies, but also electronic files within our eSchool and SIS systems. So what you'll see in front of you on this slide is a combination of the HR budget, talent development, and process improvement. And you can see that overall we have a savings of just under $200,000. You will see a majority of that saving in salaries and benefits. As Mrs. Yara alluded to, we took a look at return on investment and looking at the structure that we have in several of our departments. And with the looming uncertainty with revenue and where our budget was, there were some decisions being made that some positions wouldn't continue in FY22. And I'll allude to those more specifically as we go through each department, but that's where you see the majority of savings throughout the HR budgets. So for the main HR budget, you do see a slight uptick in salary and benefits, and you'll see the majority of savings in purchase services. And as we go through our contracts, you'll be able to see where we realize those savings. So the detail of contracts, you will see that we have some savings in our unemployment tracker. Last year we switched vendors for our partners to help track our unemployment claims as well as defend our unemployment claims. And little did we know when we switched over how much assistance we may need with all those unemployment claims. But that has reduced our contract there, as well as our frontline technologies. That is based off of a user, and we have realized that we didn't have as many users on our frontline systems, so we were able to reduce that by a little over $6,000. You'll notice $19,000 with PowerSchool. Last year was the first year for implementation with both our Perform and Unified Talent, and so there were some implementation fees in year one with that contract, so this is why you see the reduction in year two. Continued on with contracts for HR, you do see that we have a Schoology that has gone up by about 4%. That is our learning management system. Other than that, you see flat dollar amounts for our Rockford University Pathways program, as well as the workplace for some additional outside recruiting when needed. To the talent development budget. Again, you see a reduction with salary and benefits. There is a director position within talent development that we've had for the last 5 years. And as Diana Alt and I analyzed the productivity of that position and what we were getting out of the money and salary and benefits we were putting in, a decision was made to reduce that director position going into FY22. And that's where you see the savings there. You'll also see, you will see some savings in supplies. And really what the supply savings are is really reallocation of some of those dollars. As we continue to build professional development, there are differentials that we pay out for teachers and other certified folks who create our professional development as well as instruct our professional development. So we wanted to make sure that we budgeted dollars for those individuals. And then contracts, you can see this year has certainly brought something different in terms of how we conduct our professional development. We don't see the need for large venues like we've had in the past. We did reserve some dollars for the what ifs because we don't know what FY22 brings to us, but we did reduce the amount for that facility rental as well as the amount of consultants or trainers that we may bring in for professional development. So you see some savings there. And as Mr. Scrivano alluded to, Public School Works is our vendor for our mandated trainings, and we have a reduction there as it is year 2 of our contract. And then finally, process improvement. You will see the savings, salaries, and benefits. That, as part of that department, was some of our auditing positions. We, again, worked with the senior manager, Sarah Kurpius, and looked at the return on those positions within that department, and was decided that 3 of those positions will not return for FY22. What you do see here is a large increase both with purchase services and supplies. And that is reflecting of the centralization of the registration process. And so more envelopes have to be purchased. We mail over 60,000 pieces of letters to parents because we mail it twice, once in the spring, once in the summer, if they have not returned their registration packet. So we need printing, materials, postage. So a lot of that is due to the increase that you see in the process improvement budget. Return on investment with our departments within HR, again, wanting to recruit, retain quality staff, professionally develop our staff, look at effective internal controls, gain efficiencies where we see, and continued employee relations. Before I move on to the insurance fund, Mr. Rollins, do you want to take questions on those, or do you what?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because this is more of a different topic.
Yep,
so why don't
exactly.
we just cut you off right there
Stop.
and just ask if anybody's got questions for this portion of the presentation. Oh, Mr. Connor.
Ken?
I have one for Matt. What's the title of the director position eliminated under the professional development?
Is the Director of Teacher Effectiveness.
Mr. Connor?
I was looking at your org chart to see what that was. Okay.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah. So on the purchase services, is there anything more than contracts that make that up? I just want to clarify for me that the total in the contracts should be the...
Yeah, some of the purchase services, like for instance in the process improvement, that is going to be some postage and others. So there are some other services that fall in line there.
It's okay, but I'm just trying to understand, because that will come to my next question. So is there an overlap at all? And I always have this as a general question about what IT has to budget versus what the departments or divisions have to purchase. So it sounds like there was several in there, like the Power School or whatever. So, in just full disclosure, Mrs. Yar and I have talked about this. It's one of the things I dislike about fund accounting is it's hard to take some costs and have it across. So that's why I'm curious on this one, because the contracts and the IT are in the purchase services. I'm assuming that it's all inclusive. In other words, if it's an IT cost for HR, it's in purchase services, basically. Is that true? Or a true assumption? And then 2 would be, are there costs on the IT side related to any of these that are either reduced or increased or whatever?
So these, in terms of HR, when you see Power School, you see Frontline,
right.
And then you see Schoology. Those are all software costs that are associated just with HR. And so we pull it out of the larger budget with Power School because it is directly related to either our HRIS system or professional development or evaluation. And so we had an existing contract with Power School already, so this was an additional contract with them that was specifically for the use of HR.
Yeah, I'm not questioning the usage. It's really how we show it. So one of the things that I would suggest is that there are certain costs that, in a sense, from my point of view, are really horizontal. And I think IT, there's a lot of building and other kinds of costs. I mean, there are certain things that you can tag really across the board. And all I want is clarity on this. So that if you said, hey, Schoology, we're the ones using this, although I thought it was used by some other areas. But my point would more be, as long as we have a sense of how it affects the various budgets, because obviously the contracts, when we negotiate them, aren't broken down. It's just all with Power School or whatever. And so, I'm not 100% sure what I'm really asking you to do, but I think as long as we can tie it back horizontally, so that we know the impacts of these. And my example is, because I know I looked and, there was textbooks and, all kinds of things in some of this. And to make it sensible is you'd have to ask yourself this question, which I've asked a number of times, if we buy physical textbooks versus electronic, how does that hit, and what do we do across the board? It would be the same here. If you buy an HRIS, it's got to be supported somehow. And so all I'm trying to do is, as I walk through these various divisions or departments, I'm just trying to make sure I know what ties with what, because at the end of the day, a lot of those contracts are one contract, or you're supported by one department for the servers underneath or what have you.
And I'll let Ms. Yar answer that question.
Yeah, so what we're doing is bringing forward the department's budgets, but yes, we can pull with the overall district budget. We can pull the object, so that's what I'm going to get technical, a little bit technical here. With the object codes are the ones that'll say, for software. So we'll have an object code for software, and so then I can pull it by object code for all funds. But not everybody has that access, but finance does, and so we can pull it different ways to see how much do we spend overall for the district on certain object codes, that type of thing. So,
I think that would be very
codes,
valuable because, especially as we see this and as we get new stuff, if I might say so, almost always we have this same question is if one department buys this, there is a pinging effect on IT. There's got to be, or whatever, and not just them, but for buildings and so forth. And all I'm trying to do is make sure that when we have our cost management, we see how things are interconnected. That's my total goal here. So
yeah, at the end of our process, so you can see all these detail of contracts. So what we do, what we did last year, is we aggregate all of that together. So we dump it all into Excel. It's already in Excel. We dump it all together, aggregate it all, sort it by the vendor, and make sure that we negotiate the contract at a high level. So and then we have the object codes, correct at that time as well. So we can pull it, and we do show it by category, both in the CAFR and in the budget. At the end, we show how much we spend in personnel, how much we spend in purchase services. We'll show that as well. So
I think Mrs. McCulloch had a question, and I know Mr. Siegel had a question too. Mrs. McCulloch, did you have a question still?
I do. Well, the Human Resource Department org chart that's at the beginning of that slide presentation before the other slides, is that the current one? Is that it? Or you took out like 4 positions, right?
That's current. Yep, that's the way it stands right now.
Okay, so you haven't shown us, where those other from. Okay, thank you for that. And then secondly, and this would be actually across all departments, and that is in this new day and age of doing professional development remotely via Zoom or whatever, people aren't attending conferences, they're doing an awful lot on computers. So we're saving a lot of money on flights, hotels, all those areas. Will we be able to see a savings across all these departments in that area as well? And how about we could specifically say yours, and as Ms. Yar was saying, she could actually pull it up district-wide at some point if we were to look at that.
I believe
I'm saying next year won't. I'm thinking next year people will continue along the same vein in many circumstances. Or are you not changing what you're budgeting?
Oh, I know specifically for our departments in terms of the professional development line in ours, it is reduced from FY21 to FY22. And so when you go that granular, we did look at that budget, to your point, Mrs. McCulloch, that, there's many more opportunities for virtual, so we're not traveling, hotel, mileage. So we did reduce that within the HR budget as far as professional development.
And we did that across the board for fiscal year 21. We took it down, professional development and the training that goes along with that professional development. We took that down by 50%, knowing that we wouldn't be traveling, that type of thing, and that was their starting point. So basically, fiscal year 22 was reduced 50%. The department's going to ask for that, but really that's what we expect to have happen. So all departments were cut 50% in that line item.
Okay. And then you did talk about centralization of registration and the change this year. We will continue to go with the central online as much and not do all these in-school 2-day, everybody bring your family, other than I know that the elementary schools still like to do a back-to-school night or whatever, but our intention is that to stay central.
Yes, at this time, we're going to try to repeat much of what we've done last year because we have so many remote families still, where at the elementary level in the springtime when we would typically send registration packets home with those families and then get them back, we don't see as many of those students. So our plan moving forward is to create the process very similar to last year, where it will be centralized by the process improvement team, and they will do all of the mailings and input for families. And then we will look in August at what families still remain in terms of who have not returned the registration packets, or if they were late enrollees, and how we might engage building staff, clericals, and principals to engage those families to come in on either a scheduled time or a time frame to, again, reduce the amount of folks that are bunched up at one time.
Nothing but good feedback about that. Not for the reason why we had to do it, but the fortune and the job that we did with it, and so many families were just, it's about time. So I'm pleased to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Siegel, did you still have a question?
Okay, perfect.
I just had a couple of questions. So it struck me, we've got a separate sub-budget for talent development. We have a lot of discussions about recruiting, but we haven't really talked at all about recruiting, and that just must be buried in the regular human resources budget, I assume?
Yeah, that's a part of just the overall HR budget. And so if you go granular into the HR budget, there are somewhere between 10 and 15 actual GL accounts, line items that are dedicated just to recruitment. And then even broken down into minority recruitment as well. So that's another granular level that is embedded into the HR budget.
So that was actually the specific question I was going to ask, is we've had those discussions as well. Do you feel that we're adequately staffed for that, that we've got a sufficient budget going forward? I assume, we had troubles this year, I assume, because of everything that was going on, but...
It wasn't a dollar issue this year, it was more access issue, but I do feel like we have done some reallocating of dollars to ensure that the recruitment team has all of the dollars they need for travel, for materials, memberships. If the board would like, I can certainly send the total amount that's allocated at this point for recruitment.
And I was just curious, under Mrs. McCulloch's report, we had talked about under the consent agenda, the housing incentives. Is that part of this budget?
No, that lies in a district-wide budget, which is, to get technical, 580 is the HR budget, and we embed the housing and some other district-wide into a 580 account because it impacts many schools and across the district, but we capture that in the full budget.
Yeah, so that's brought forward at the end in the overall district budget.
It just seems like that's a recruiting incentive, isn't it? So isn't it? To me, why wouldn't that just be part of recruiting?
We certainly could put it in there, and I would defer to Ms. Yar and team, but certainly we could put it there.
We could certainly put it there. We could certainly move it there.
Okay, were there any other questions about that part of Mr. Zedeker's presentation? So
actually, Mr. Rollins, on slide 7, it is under Human Resources highlights recruitment housing incentives.
I was just asking if yeah, okay. So
you got it there.
Here, but it's not apparently part of your budget.
Well, yeah, it lies somewhere else, but that's what we focus on, yes.
Okay. So I'm just going to remind everybody before we start the next part of the presentation is our largest expenditure in the district is salaries. Our second largest expenditure is what we're going to talk about next, which is health insurance.
We will dive into our health insurance fund, Fund 11. Before I get going, we do have our partner for Williams Manny, Michael Parsons is here, as well as Inez Harris, our Senior Manager of Benefits. As we dive in with some more detailed questions, they will be here to help facilitate that discussion. For our Fund 11, from a strategic plan perspective, we focus on quality staff as well as fiscal and operational stewardship. Highlights for and where we focus our benefits on is looking at our health and dental, wellness, retirees, our leave of absence, worker comp, long and short-term disability, as well as 403B. So it's a pretty comprehensive benefits department. And year in and year out, the board has been used to information that's been provided to us by Williams Manny. And again, we'll look at trend data here from how we have, I guess, really performed over the last 1920 full year. So you can see from this side, we date this all the way back to FY 2016, and run it through FY 2020. You will see that over the course of that year, we've approximately increased about 1.69% per year. It's about 8.45% higher in 2020 than it was in 2016. But at that same time, industry standard was about 6%. So when we compare it to trend, we are still performing very well in terms of our health fund. And currently in FY21, we are running at about just under $16,000 per employee per year expenditure, which is about 2.4% higher than the previous year. Same information represented here on a graph just to show the difference on where our actual claims versus the 6% annual trend. Again, you can see how well we are performing compared against the averages. COVID was a big part of 1920, and so we have a couple of slides dedicated to some COVID information. But if you take a look at March when this began and ran through May claims, they were about 11% below expected. We weren't seeing individuals go for procedures. Things were kind of postponed, so we saw that dip. June, July, August claims were at or above expected, and so we saw that come back in terms of some of those procedures. Claims volumes are expected to normalize, and we did see a greater use of our virtual teledoc that we provide to our employees. Some COVID-related expenses, you can see from March to June of 2020, we had just over $38,000 in COVID-related expenses. Then you take that same, and then you take July to November of 2020, and you can see how that's increased to just a little over $473,000 in COVID-associated claims. So we have some potential increases in cause for increased costs, and really want to direct you to the information around some of our specialty medication. 19.6% per employee per month increase from FY 2019 to FY 20. Specialty medications accounted for 38.3% of the total RX spends, which is up from 35.4%. And there is, one top specialty, our highest earner there. We had one medication over the last 12 months cost us just under $479,000. So the trend, again, in medical inflation is expected to hover right around 6%, and there are some potentials for large claims for next year. Things that we're doing, again, to continue to try to initiate some cost savings, cost avoidance, is continuing with our wellness initiative, with our screenings, health risk assessment, as well as our points program. We are continuing to work with Express Scripts as our pharmacy management and programs within Express Scripts. We will continue our teledoc. The board just approved a continuation of that contract for virtual visits. And then the renew contract with Express Scripts, where we're looking at some improved discounts and rebates from Express Scripts in that contract. Detail of some contracts that are associated with Fund 11. You will see a slight decrease in our Allied, which is our retirement administration. We're expiring some of the programs that are associated with that, and then through an audit, we were able to clean up the members that were in those programs, so we're seeing a little bit of a savings there. We're seeing a savings and a potential savings in claims for medical and dental for FY22. And the Gallagher Services contract that was adopted by the board last year, that reflects the increase in that contract. Continuing contracts, we see a little bit of an increase with our long-term disability and our group life. And we see a significant decrease in our stop loss. So we were able to go to market and take a look at our stop loss insurance, and we're going to see a nice decrease in that expenditure for FY22. And then you will see at the very bottom the wellness program with the asterisk. As the board recalls, we did adopt Interactive Health. They filed Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and so we had to go to Empower Health just to offer our biometric screenings and our risk assessment just for this year only. So we will be going back out to bid for our wellness provider. So that will come back through board. So that $395 is an estimated cost of what we think it could potentially cost us. Claims history that Michelle Sather and the team has been able to go through for our claims dating back to 2017. Again, you can see that we've remained relatively flat with small increases. Again, I think that's a credit to our employees, our behavior, some of the plan changes that have been implemented since 2017, and I think we're seeing really the return on investment for that. Again, we're looking at mitigating some healthcare costs, provide quality benefits, customer service for our retirees as they are a large portion of our work, and then continuing to work to be wellness conscious employees. One addition that I would like to add that I did speak to Mr. Rollins about is that we did have, as part of our Express Scripts contract, an audit performed on how we're performing there as well as within the contract. We just got the data back yesterday. We have not had a chance to dive into it in great extent, but some high-level things that we're taking a look at that have been revealed is that there are some medications that are costing us quite a bit and have proven not to be effective. So we need to take a look at do we want to continue to cover those medications in our plan, as well as taking a look at the discounts and rebates that we were awarded and working through our contract to make sure that we are getting all of the rebates that we are accounted for in our contract. So I will continue to update the board as we've had an opportunity to really dive into the data, but did want to inform the board that that audit did take place and that we will continue to provide that information from that audit. Questions?
No, we have that one really spectacular medication that's very, very expensive. Do we have like a group that's also extraordinarily expensive, but obviously not quite that bad, but trying to gauge like how does the cost cascade? Do we have like a group of the next 10, or they're all really expensive too, but then below that it's nothing?
Primarily, your largest cost is going to be your specialty medications. Clearly, the one that's running at about $500,000 a year is a specialty medication. But then there's a group below, obviously, that. But those can run anywhere from $1,000 to $40,000 a pop. And so when we talk about 38% of your drug spend was these medications, it's made up by less than 1% of your population, probably somewhere in the range of 100 people who are actually on those medications that are driving the cost. Answer your question?
Connor? Yeah, I do want to comment on that one. Having been in the insurance business, although not so much the health side, is it's the nature of a risk pool for this to occur. And one of the things that you might say about it, and help me on this, if you look at those claims, which from my point of view are relatively flat, if you really look at the numbers, one of the things that's happening is you do get people, and this is one of the drivers of health, who are younger coming in, and that helps to keep that claim experience down, and it has gone up, but you know, it looks to my eye like it's still under the inflation rate for medical in general. So that would tell me, just like Mr. Zediker said, that we must be doing something right on that. So kind of a two-part question is, you know, is that the individual management too, or is it, you know, is Blue Cross Blue Shield a part of that? And obviously, you know, the second part of that is that the actual variance is substantial on that. So I'd just like to hear a little bit more about, you know, why that number is frankly as good as it is. So two parts. Does Blue Cross Blue Shield have something to do with that, or is it the program in general for that, keeping that claim rate, from my point of view, relatively flat, especially under the rate of inflation? And the second is just maybe at a high level, some of the factors on the $339,000 less from one year to another. So,
couple things. I don't think this is any one thing that has created the situation where your plan is one of the best running plans that we work with. First, Blue Cross does an excellent job for us. We work with them because they deliver excellent discounts. They are a great partner, and they negotiate very good discounts with the local provider. So to start with, we start with a very good base cost. In addition to that, over the last, I've been working with...
I hate to interrupt, but
sorry.
That's things like, you know, hospitals, individual doctor visits, all those kinds of things are where they're in the negotiation. Is that also, you know, cost of drugs, that kind of thing, or is it mostly just on the services side?
With Blue Cross, it's primarily, we look at inpatient, outpatient, physician, are the areas where they're working, where we work with them, where they're negotiating discounts. On the high deductible health plan, the medications come through Blue Cross, but Express Scripts is on the PPO program. Right. So working with them is where the discounts come. And over the last, I've been working in the district, I think about 10 years, we have consistently been able to negotiate some pretty good prescription drug contracts, which has helped us, particularly in the rebate situation, to help offset some of those costs. Yeah. So those is another area where we've been able to offset costs and get better discounts off of average wholesale price, which is what we tend to base our discounts and our costs off of for prescription drugs. So working with Blue Cross is good. Working with ESI, being able to negotiate good contracts has helped us. In addition to that, you've made some plan changes over the years that I think have also helped to impact that. And I think there's been a lot of buy-in from your membership as well, trying to make sure that they manage the plan appropriately. So I think that everything has come together to try and has worked well to make this a plan that overall runs well. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Matt, the question on page, I think it's 29, you list out the COVID-related claims from July to November at the bottom of that slide.
Yes.
So there's $320,000 roughly for all other COVID. Is that inpatient, outpatient care?
It's really down to care and treatment. Yep, okay. Exactly.
Okay.
Ken, this is Jude. I have a question.
Okay, all right. Ms. McCullough?
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't... and you just moved the slide. Just please tell me what PEPM is. 19.6% PEPM. I'm trying.
Yep, PEPM is per employee per month.
So our cost is going to, or went up already, 19.6 per employee per month, from 19 to 20.
From 19 to 20. Yep, that's on the
right.
That's on the specialty medication.
Just on specialty medications, okay.
Correct.
On those medications, are those individuals paying any sort of copay? I mean,
yeah, yes, they do have a copay. We have a tiered structure for our generic, our tier 2, and our specialty medication. So there is a copay for our individuals for that medication.
And for the medications, that is covered in this audit that you just got the results of yesterday, correct? To see if there's other drugs that would be more effective, or if, you know, the efficacy of the ones that are chosen. Otherwise, how is it determined that, is it totally up to the caregiver, the clinician who says this is the one to be used? Do we have anything in there about experimental drugs? I mean, how do we get into a situation with a cost like that?
For specialty medications, they have to be approved through our PBM partner, through Express Scripts. So if a doctor prescribes a medication, most of those are going to require some form of prior authorization and approval. So that's one of the ways that we protect against any form of abuse there. And then the second question was?
Well then, I asked if our patients are employees using, is there any sort of participation in experimental or clinical trials, and do we cover all that?
So experimental medications are not covered under your plan, and so those would not be an eligible expense, generally speaking, if you're part of that kind of a program. The program itself helps to provide for the cost of the medication. So everything that we're working with that's paid for your plan has been approved by the FDA.
So if what Mr. Zediger was speaking to, that an audit came back and we had people on drugs that were determined to be ineffective, how would they be on those if they're ineffective? Wouldn't our drug plan have flagged that and not paid for it? Why do we have to go back and do the audit? Why isn't it caught when they're prescribed?
So when we talk about those medications, they have been found to be somewhat effective, but when we talk about them being ineffective, the fact is that there are medications out there that are more effective and more cost effective, but for whatever reason, they're still out there, they're still approved by the FDA, and when we take a look at it, we're really kind of getting down into that very low level and saying, you know what, you have these out there, is there really a reason why can't we just move everybody towards in this direction to try and save some dollars? So I guess we should watch our wording here. There is some effectiveness to those medications, but there are other things out there that are still more effective and that we could potentially manage better.
Okay, that makes more sense. But legally, can we require, or is it part of the policy that we can make a patient shift to a different, equally effective medicine that has less cost?
Yes.
We can. Okay, last thing, we had this conversation a couple years ago, and I can't remember where we landed. What do we pay for on life insurance, and what do we not pay for? Because it was my understanding we were getting out of the life insurance business with our employees, but I saw on that one slide, Reliance Standard Life Insurance Company, so at 600,000 and then going up.
Mrs. McCulloch, you're referring to retiree life insurance. Prior to, I believe, 2 contracts ago, we continued to supply life insurance for our retirees, and that since has been taken away, but we still do supply life insurance for active employees.
We pay for life insurance for all the active employees. Do they also pay into that, or are we shouldering that entire cost?
That is a benefit that we pay for, but the employee does have an opportunity if they want to pay for voluntary life. That would be on the employee.
Wow. Is that the norm in industry nowadays? That,
oh, yeah.
That,
yes.
Absolutely it is.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
I always said that.
Just had a couple of questions. You know, we keep talking about per employee per year, per employee per month. I wanted a clarification on that. Are we talking about actual total number of employees? Are we talking about participants?
Active participants in the plan.
Active participants in the plan. Because one of the interesting things is that from 2019 to 2020, we had the largest increase in percentage of the PEPY cost. The claims went down. Total claims on slide 34. So does that mean we have fewer participants?
All right, Mr. Allen's trying to get back to the slide here.
You go to slide 34, from 2019 to 2020, our total claims went down, and yet on slide 26, you're showing the largest increase we've had in recent years in the PEPY. cost. My assumption is that means that we have fewer participants then. So we're spreading the same number over fewer lives. Is that what's going on?
Say there's some, and I'd have to check the census to verify that. I would say that's part, but I'd also say part of what we look at in terms of how we report some of our projected claims is with accrual counting and how the team pulls that versus the information that we pull from Blue Cross. But I will also check the census in terms of the number of active employees on the plan.
Yeah, just it's worth looking at because you've got two slides with two potentially different pieces of information. One going down, one going up. So just double check that.
Will do.
And then on the prescription drug audit, I understand that you just got the results yesterday. It would have been nice to be able to talk about them today, but will you put that in one of the board updates then, a written sort of summary of what the findings were and what the conclusions and recommendations are?
Yes, Michael and I will meet with the individual who performed the audit to get some greater detail, and then I will work with Dr. Jarrett to get a written update to the board on the results of that.
Okay, and then how often do we do that audit?
In terms of the pharmacy audit, that's the first time we've done that since I've been in charge, but that is something that we have worked into the Express Script contract, so that's something we're going to do more regularly as there's going to be dollars provided for those types of audits.
Because the trend is, obviously, we've been talking about this for a number of years, this is a larger and larger percentage of our costs. So it sounds like you're getting some findings out of the audits, so it might be useful to start doing them a little more frequently.
There's also some things from Express Scripts, some programs that have started that we're looking at as well. We're in the initial stages to take a look at some possible programs with some of our medication that could potentially save both us as a district, but also employees. And so we're at the very early stages to taking a look at those as well.
And I would, Mr. Siegel, you're always looking for things to talk to the lobbyists about. So the specialty medication, there's got to be some legislative fix to this because this is starting to get out of hand. And, one of the things that particularly annoys me is, what I read about. These are all drugs that are under patent. So these drug companies have a monopoly on them. And, one of the things I think that is happening, at least from what I read, is that they're sold overseas in countries that have caps on what they can charge for a fraction of what we get charged. And I really think that's fair. So I think some of the larger states are starting to step in and start looking at some legislative action. So that would be something to talk to our lobbyists and our legislators about.
Well, Mr. Rollins, isn't that what happened with the EpiPen? And I know that they're looking.
So that was one drug that people got incensed about, and there was a lot of national discussion about it. But you can see that this is going on more and more with more and more drugs.
Yeah.
Aren't we expecting just a huge increase next year when all the people who didn't have their surgeries this year are out there getting knees and hips and whatever else fixed?
That is a potential risk, but we did have the opportunity later in this year where some procedures were performed, but there certainly is a risk for that, and that's something we identified for a risk for our Fund 11 account, but we think it's going to level off and be as expected. We're not expecting a gigantic increase.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I have to follow up on the one where you so emphatically said that that we could limit what people get. I think that's within a certain context because I know like the really expensive ones, often those are the only ones. So there's probably a category we can't touch. And maybe some of the others we could negotiate some things, but isn't it really up to the individual doctor or provider, for those kinds of choices? And you might have recommendations, but I'm trying to think of a situation where you could say, and I'm going to make it up, some kind of heart medicine, and there's 3 of them out there. I mean, can we say we'll only pay from this list? And is that then part of the negotiation up front?
Yes. So most of the time when you take a look at your pharmacy list, if you look at most of your health plans, you're going to have a tiered list on there. You're going to have Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Tier 1 tends to be your generics, very common. Tier 2, your brand names. Tier 3 can be specialty, but Tier 3 is often medications where there are more than one drug that does the same thing. And the PBM, our pharmacy benefit manager, then goes out and negotiates, and then depending on their negotiations, who ends up as number 2 and tier 2, and here ends up tier 3 with the higher copays. But they have moved, most PBMs have moved to what we call an exclusionary formulary, where some of those medications are being excluded completely. If there is an option, or there's 1, 2, or 3 medications out there, they may eliminate one altogether, and the plan doesn't have to cover that. I've never seen one where they're going to eliminate all the drugs that treat that certain condition, right. But there may be a situation where they eliminate some of them. So that's when I say that you can do some steerage, that's what we're talking about.
Okay, because I really wanted to be clear on that, because I think there are limits on a lot of this, that essentially if it's on, the tiered list, that's okay. So again, you're doing this up front. You're saying, based on the research, there's 4 potential, we'll do these 3 and all, but that's baked in, because when it comes to an individual doctor, they pretty much, they choose from the list, right? I mean, okay, when you said that, I was like, I wanted to make sure that.
Yeah. Pearson, do you have a question?
Yes, sir. So in regards to the specialty medications, is it possible that there can be guidelines set up where they would have to, not have to, but recommend or associate the benefit with using a drug A for 6 to 8 months and review the outcome of that before escalating to a more expensive or costly, rather, specialty drug?
So what you're referring to is what we call step therapy. We do have step therapy currently on the plan. So most of our medications where there isn't a lower cost alternative, they often request that you try the lower cost first before you move to a higher cost medication. And those higher costs can also be a little more difficult for the body to deal with. So there's some safety concerns that we try to address in that same area as well. But if they've gone through the steps and they end up with that higher cost medication, then there's not a lot to be done. And really, to your point, Mr. Connor, this is a health plan, and some of these drugs are miracle drugs. They cost a lot of money, but they change people's lives. And so our job, what I look is, how do we do the best we can from a cost perspective, but still make sure that we get people the care that they need. And so that's where all of this kind of comes into play.
Because that could be one of ours. Sorry.
We're done with Mr. Zedeker. Is that correct? All right, Mr. Earl Dotson Jr., if you would come up, and you've got the next presentation. Looks loose and ready to go.
Evening. With respect to time, and if it so pleases the chair, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay.
I think you could go through your presentation.
Okay.
Well, just checking.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, if I may digress before I start.
Well, that answers that, huh?
As someone who has read recognitions for quite some time now, I'm going to officially pass the torch this evening to Mr. David Siegel, who pronounced those names and enunciated them perfectly.
All right.
So I'm passing the torch. You are the new hype man for the district. The other thing, one last thing, I'd like to sincerely apologize, particularly to Mr. Connor, that I am not as immaculately dressed as Mr. Zedeker is this evening. So if you would forgive me, please, sir. I will do better next time, sir.
This is a casual meeting.
Right, so communications. All right, here is our organizational chart. If you would notice, there is an opening in the Welcome Center that we actually are interviewing for. We have an interview set up for tomorrow to fill that position. And in the Parent and Community Engagement Department, we lost an individual, and we are not refilling that position, so we're doing our part to help the budget, the bottom line there.
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
If you could see, here are our core functions of our department. Just some highlights I'd like to point out. I really was proud of what our team did this year collectively, but particularly Kathy Bear did a great job with communicating all of the ransomware kind of information as well as the COVID updates. Also, we're very, very happy with our new website. Thank you, board, for your input, and to the community, parents, and staff who also help make that what it is. We are very happy, thanks to the finance department, who found some coins laying around. They found a few coins on the floor to help us upgrade the boardroom, the visual in the boardroom, so that so we can enhance our public presentation. So new microphones, new projectors are coming. So excited about that. And then shout out to Connor Childers, who Mr. Scrivano recognizes. I thought, considering the circumstances last year, partnering with the schools team, he did a great job presenting with our virtual graduation that we were able to do. So I was very happy and very pleased with that. As a family and community engagement, again, we continue to be the portal, if you will, for community engagement with our district. Despite the pandemic this year, we were still able to conduct some volunteer programs. So Rockford Reeds, who have been with our district for a very long time, were able to did a pilot at Gregory, some virtual mentoring. And then the virtual senior mentor program, leader to leader, college and career readiness, we still do all the background checks. So Bridget French and her team, the senior mentor class at Jefferson still went forward. They still are doing, experimenting with some virtual mentoring there as well. We were able to also do donations and drives this year. Thank you, Swedish American. We were able to collaborate with them to do a mask drive and a backpack drive. And then we also, Fred Van Vliet and his family donated, they bought coats for all of the students at Welsh this year. So, to them as well. The highlights, again, I just want to, I think the one I want to just point out, the community partnerships and emerging needs. Maureen Kirschman on our team, again, has excellent relationships with our community partners, and they were able to support us early on with, I guess, about additional food locations to drop off food. They partner with us on potential childcare for our employees and providing extra enrichment for our students who were remote. So really, really happy with our community partnerships. If you look at our budget here for the communications department, mostly reduction, mostly flat. The one increase in purchase services, of course, was for the new website. And you can see the details of the contract. You can see where that is reflected, the website money. The promotions, as you can see, they're down. One of the things that the 205 Vibe has allowed us to do, you knew I had to get a 205 Vibe reference in there. But one of the things that has allowed us to do from a marketing standpoint is, because it is a digital platform, we do mostly digital marketing now, which is a lot cheaper and a lot more effective. So happy with some of the strides we've made in the digital marketing platform. So return on investment, we certainly want to make sure we continue to attract families, collaborating with the Human Resources Department to recruit a diverse quality workforce. Obviously, it's very important that we promote positive stories in the district, and again, quality community partnerships. In regards to the Welcome Center and Families in Transition, again, you can see the kind of the core functions of our Welcome Center. Highlights there, again, the team really, they're very proud of the wait time. You can see the 75% reduction. They really get families in. They're very efficient with the time what families have to spend down there. And then the other thing, just building off what Mr. Zedeker said, we're also working for this centralization project, kind of a one-stop shop on the first floor. So that project continues. As in transition, you can see, again, the core functions there. And again, that team has really, really worked hard to continue to streamline the entry into the program and really making sure that the people who need that program and those services are the ones who get those. You can see our budget. Mostly flat. Then we have one contract. The LexisNexis Risk Solutions works really great just in verifying addresses for people who come through the door. And the return on investment, obviously, it's very important that we get students enrolled effectively, make sure that they know what our district and board policies are, which leads to increased state funding, and then working with legal to make sure that, again, that we make sure the people who need to be in the program are in the program. And again, they have a great group of individuals down there who provide high quality customer service for. They are a public facing department, in front of the first people that our customers, outside people, see. And then bring up the rear here, security services. Again, you can see the core functions. Obviously, not as much activity on some of the others as relates to police and guards this year. But again, just to shout Fred Deal, man, he has really anchored our COVID response, setting up the committees, setting up our operations. We started that from day one in March, and it has continued on through. So the bulk of his time has been spent with that whole, the whole kind of monitoring that whole situation and all the things that come along with that. See, his budget here is mostly flat. The increases are, you can see, into the supplies. So we still have keyless access entryways, doors that we still need to, we still put those, there are still buildings who need keyless access doors, and there are still buildings who need secure entryways into their buildings. So there's still some of those on the list. We're still working on those. And then, of course, camera installation continues as well. You can see our services detail of our contracts, flat. And again, of course, return on investment. Obviously, it's very important that we provide a safe and secure environment for all students and staff. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions. Is that, Lori? 5 minutes?
Connor? Yeah, I've got a couple things.
Sure.
One is a suggestion. If you go back to the slide 64, right there at the end, I think it should be apparent that purchase services is really mostly Securitex, I believe. And it would be, I think, helpful to see when you have your, like, who reports to you. I think because that is such a huge contract, and I'd have the same comment for Mr. Phillips with Aramark, is that if it's under an individual, you know, that's a huge operation and probably should be shown as at least a box or something, again, just because of size. So that would be a suggestion for virtually anybody. If there's a large organization, it should be shown, because one of the things we need to say is if an organization has a lot of outside consulting, and that could apply maybe somewhat to IT, is that we show that, because that is part of the complexity of that.
Duly noted. Thank you, sir.
Yep. And then this is one I brought up actually the last board meeting, but it's for Mr. Siegel, actually. I forgot to mention this one for the lobbyists. There is a bill before the state right now that would restrict police in the schools, and I don't know where that is, but that I'm just going to say, for me personally, that we have a good relationship with our officers, and it's been a very successful unit, and a lot of good things have come to the claimants of the school. And so the one thing I would say is that it's well worth our lobbyists, and I'm speaking for myself, I know not as the board, but I certainly would like to know where we are with that bill, and encourage us to say that, you know, if there's anything like evidence, that we would be a part of where working with the local officers has been very successful. So I really was using the whole security as an opportunity to also point out that that is something I think that we should say it's been successful here.
So my understanding right now, Mr. Connor, is that bill is in committee where things typically die. So right now it's just, it's in limbo land. So not, we don't know what the status is, but that's where it is right now.
I like it in limbo. I just wanted to make sure.
Mr. Connor, I don't know if this is what you were asking about, but on slide 65, they've got the security checks broken out with the city of Rockford, so you can see exactly how much each of those two contracts is. A question that's really more of a Michelle question. Talking about the Welcome Center made me think of another question. So our enrollment is down because of the pandemic. What effect does that have on our potentially have on our funding, our state funding, moving forward?
With evidence-based funding, you can use a 3-year average. That's how it's written right now. It's 3-year average, or use your current. So they pull your enrollment in the fall and then again in the spring, and they do an average. I would expect that we would hear something because everyone's going to experience the same thing that we are with a decrease in enrollment. So we haven't heard anything. I'm not. I think they have to do something. We would use a 3-year average at this point, but I think that because of what we're all experiencing, that the state's going to have to do something, but I don't know that.
I guess it's another thing to add to your list for the lobbyists, Mr. Siegel. Or we
Can I have a question?
Ahead, Mrs. McCulloch.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I have a couple. So, Welcome Center. When does the Welcome Center move to the first floor? It's been so long since I've been in the building. I don't even know how close they are to being done. Can somebody tell me?
Mr. Phillips can tell you exactly, but it's my understanding we will have a phased-in rollout. So I think it needs to be before June 30th. Is that correct, sir?
Okay, and you didn't disappoint. I was waiting to hear about the vibe, so thank you for making sure you got that in there.
Thank you, Ms.
And I guess and it's really kudos to the Welcome Center about the registration piece for last year. I know the process entailed a lot more people, but I wanted to make to say a positive on that. So we have access points that are still being keyless and coded and the like. Will we complete that next year? I mean, we've been doing that for a long time. There's not that much money in there for the supplies for that. Are we just redoing, or are we actually going to finish that part of our security?
Thank you, Mrs. McCullough. That's a great question. Typically that is all based on schools, right, and how their level of safety and security. And so most of these come from, when you were in a building, oftentimes the way some of these older buildings are configured, the staff will meet and get together and say, hey, this entrance this is weird, or you know what, there's no keyless access here, so this is not safe. And so they'll call Fred and they'll go out and they'll meet and take a look at it and talk. So that's typically how that happens. But to answer your question, I don't know if we'll be done. It oftentimes depends, again, on the requests from buildings.
With regard to that, slide 65, City of Rockford Police Support, $1,300,000 for this year total, and you're projecting for next year. Did we use that same level of support this year with the number of students in the buildings at half in our secondary schools and in fiscal year 20, where the schools had no students in them from March till the end of the year, did we not have a savings there? Or were we beholden to pay this money anyways? Is this kind of like ILC? We have a minimum?
I'll try to help answer that. I'm not certain on FY20 where we landed, but we can definitely get that for you. But I do know for fiscal year 21, we have not been utilizing that contract as previously budgeted. So at this point, I think we're projecting about $1 million savings in that contract.
Okay, so that's part of that savings that we were looking at, that 10 to the positive. All right, and Mr. Connor, I have to tell you, it's not just the state, it's nationally, this move toward reducing the number of police in schools. I was listening to a whole group down at the University of Illinois that just wants that whole police department disbanded because you don't need it. So I don't know that it will just die. hopefully it'll have its day for the conversation so people don't feel like it was ignored. And we'll see where we end up.
Well, yeah, that's a conversation I think a lot of us want to have. I think to paint everything with a broad brush is a mistake. And certainly there's other things happening at the state right now that are unfunded mandates and dictates, from my point of view, on what can be taught. And so what I would say is that one of the things for the lobbyists, and I'm happy to volunteer on this one, is that, you know, our voice needs to be heard.
Mrs. McCulloch, thank you for recognizing the Welcome Center. Thank you. That they were one of the first departments who were back in the building early on from it. So thank you for recognizing.
You betcha. Okay.
If there are no other questions for Mr. Dotson, thank you, Mr. Dotson. There are no consent items for the February 9th or February 23rd board agendas from this committee, and that completes the report for the Planning and Development Committee.
Given the time, I'm going to do this quickly on the governance. We have just one item to report on. That's the Standing Committee operating guidelines. I have drafted 6 that I will send out. Mrs. Fromm sent you the resolution so you could review those. I have not heard back from any board members yet, but here are the 6 drafted Standing Committee operating guidelines. I'll do these quickly. Each of the standing committees will be chaired by a board member on a rotating basis, and we're talking about maybe doing that every 2 years to rotate that. Second operating guideline is that the board president will appoint the standing committee chairpersons. Third is that the board president will chair the governance committee, and the board vice president will chair the planning committee. 4 is the superintendent will make the administrative staff liaison appointments to each committee. Number 5 is that each standing committee will regularly report at the committee of the whole meetings. Reports will be limited to 60 minutes each. And number 6 is the committee chair and staff liaison will meet prior to each committee of the whole meeting to prepare their agendas and reports. Those are the guidelines that I've kind of drafted. I will email those to you so you can review them. And then if you have additions or changes to any of those, please let me know. We'll try to wrap this up in a month here. The consent agenda items to be coming up under governance will be at the February 9th meeting. Our meeting minutes are 21-22 academic calendar, contract purchase orders. We have 2 student zone appeals, a workers' comp settlement, and the Freedom of Information log. And those are the consent agenda items for governance. So any questions for me? Okay. Don't have anyone, I'm sure, that has hung around for petitions or communications. So I have 5 follow-ups that I just want to make sure that have. One is for Mrs. Peterson on the suggestions that came for PDSA for Tier 1 and Tier 2. One from me and one from Mr. Connor. Matt Vosberg, I have one for you, and that is the follow-up on the ILC's student numbers so that we can review the averages for the contract. Zedeker, I got 3 for you. Okay, all right. One was the recruitment budget portion amounts. One was checking on the active health plan participant numbers for years 19 and 20 that Mr. Rollins asked about. And third was audit report on the prescription meds or whatever that's you were. I'm sure you have that down anyway. So I think any others that we need to follow up on. Very good.
Ken, this is Jude.
Go ahead, Ms. McCulloch.
Mr. Zedeker, the information that you sent me about both the housing and recruitment initiatives, if you could put that into some sort of little report and send it to the board members so that they have that as well before they vote on that at the next meeting, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, it's actually planned on going out Friday with Mary Call and the superintendent's update.
Thank you.
If there are no further comments or agenda recommendations by the board, I will take a motion and a second for adjournment.
So moved.
Mr. Connor? By Mr. Rollins. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Same sign. We are adjourned at 8:10. Thank you, everyone who reported tonight. Great job.